Hello and welcome to the Shepheard-Walwyn Podcast series. My name is Jonathan Brown. Shepheard-Walwyn is a campaigning book publisher based in London, England. Our purpose is to uncover and promote new ideas to society's oldest problems. And whilst our specialty is ethical economics, something Anthony Werner, our driving force for over 40 years, has pioneered, we have branched out over the years to other related areas such as the environment and the lives and works of society's change agents. These podcasts promote ideas we're convinced can actually help us build a better society for all of us. So have a listen and be sure to share with your friends if you like them, but also tell us what you think. These are debates we all need to be part of. So without further ado, let's get into the interview. My guest today is Phil Allan. By day, Phil is a top software engineer, helping companies spot and solve quality control problems. But like all great superheroes and interesting people, he has a second role, that of a top economic policy analyst. His new book, a revised edition of the critically acclaimed work, The New Physiocrats, marries both of these skill sets together. He demonstrates the broad view essential for someone committed to providing solutions to seemingly intractable social problems, but he also shows a pragmatic and engineering mindset essential for ensuring his ideas pass his own high quality control standards. Now, whilst Phil is a native of Canada, he's currently living and working in Asia, and I recently caught up with him just ahead of his book launch to ask him about how he came to write a book about some long-dead economists, the physiocrats, and why they are still relevant today. Phil, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
So, Phil, just to give the viewers an idea of your background, what led up to, what professional or personal experiences led up to you wanting to write a book?
Right. Well, it was a little bit of a meandering path, frankly. I did my undergrad degree at the University of Waterloo in Ontario, Canada, in geography and business, and it was a unusual kind of program because it was what we call in Canada a co-op program, which basically means I had to alternate between 4-month study terms and 4-month work terms. So I had the opportunity to intern and work for various organizations and companies throughout my undergrad degree. And the second work term that I had was with a government-sponsored think tank. And basically, at that time, it was called the Policy Research Initiative. Now I think it's called Policy Horizons Canada. It might have even changed again since then. And I had been taking some undergrad courses in economics, and I was always interested in policy. And so I started working with them. It was not the last time I worked in policy during my degree, but that was kind of when it all kicked off. And I was fortunate enough to be exposed to some really interesting senior economists and senior researchers. And we had a lot of good banter, a lot of good conversation, a lot of even philosophical conversation. And it led me to having a series of notes that I was keeping in a text file about basically policy ideas that I had. This was back in 2009. And basically, I had a kind of a list of ideas that resulted from our conversations. And at the time I didn't know this, but some of the conclusions that I was coming to were in alignment with Georgist thought. And I later went on to do a term at Industry Canada, which also now has a new name. It was a ministry. It was like there was a minister of industry that was at the helm of it at the time. So yeah, I basically had a couple terms in economic policy, luckily enough. And then I ended up coincidentally falling into another career path more related to IT and financial technology, but I maintained my interest in economic policy. And I went on to, first of all, work for a brokerage and bank in Bulgaria. And at that time, I also pursued a postgraduate certificate at the University of London, SOAS, in macroeconomic policy. I continued to work on this topic part-time. But yeah, it was always really one of my passions. And I ended up with a list of notes, and that didn't have any coherence on their own. So I had basically I continued from 2009 up till 2016, 2017, just adding more and more ideas to this list. And I myself couldn't even understand some of the notes I had jotted down at that time. And I was wondering, what am I going to do with it? What am I going to do with this large document of just text? And I started organizing it into sections. And over the course of a couple years leading up to the beginning of 2018, those sections started to look more like chapters, and that sort of evolved into a book. And that's when I decided to pursue the book avenue. So yeah, it was quite a path to get there over the course of some years, but that's how it all started.
And what was it? So if you were studying in economics in 2009, then that would have been right at the time when it was evident that there were problems with our economic models, right? With the just as a crash was really starting to hit people. And but what was it that in your background that prompted you to be interested in other views and other ideas?
Right. Well, I remember one debate I was having with my peers, a friendly debate, at this very first policy position that I had, and at that time there was a period where, yeah, not it was after the crash, but at the same time, commodity prices started to soar. This would have been around between '09 and 2010, I believe. And Canada being a country somewhat dependent on resource extraction and raw materials extraction, it was all looking very, uh, let's say, a kind of treacherous position for the country. Um, it was like a lot of growth had been fueled before the crash uh, by um, uh, by the buoyant housing market at the time. And then later there was a bit of a commodities rebound as well. Um, and I just started to see problems with relying on sort of unstable forms of employment and revenue for not just the public sector but for private individuals. And I remember having this debate with my peers about some of them were actually in favor. They were saying a lot of the value is added from the point of extraction, and when the minerals or the oil are lifted from the ground, that's where the greatest margins are to be had. And I was thinking that might be true for a time, but considering how volatile commodity prices are, um, it's not something that you can necessarily count on or rely on. And I was thinking, why hasn't the Canadian economy diversified? What are the drivers behind that? And when looking at investment in real estate, primarily land, uh, you can see that there seemed to be some sort of misallocation of resources away from productive investment and towards more like land speculation and kind of riding the tide of commodity prices. So it kind of just produced a lot of questions in my mind, and that's when I started really taking notes.
And so who was it then who either instilled this desire to ask awkward questions or encouraged you to continue asking awkward or different questions about what you were seeing?
Well, I was lucky enough to be working with a great group at that time who they themselves they weren't in this business for any kind of promotion or position or they were we kind of had the same, let's say, geekiness in a way, in that we were just very involved in the topic and we loved discussing policy. And so and the people around me were very open-minded, so there was no trepidation to ask any questions or to discuss or debate, and it was all kind of healthy discussion. So I think I can credit my early colleagues to be my seniors in particular to be helping to facilitate that.
Yeah, fantastic. And so the book then came out of you didn't set out to write a book then. You were just
Oh no.
making notes on what you were seeing and things that did or didn't make sense and ideas that could make a difference.
That's exactly right. And in the early days, I had no knowledge of land value tax or anything in the Georgist realm. It was basically just an aggregation of notes. Like you said, I didn't set out to write a book. And in fact, probably if I did set out to write a book, I don't know if I could have actually done it because it seems like such a big mountain to climb. So it was just basically a way of recording my thoughts and observations and things that I was noticing. And it was basically like a multi-year long brainstorming session. And then it was just that I didn't know what to do with the notes. And when I realized I had so many of them, that I started to think about turning it into something more.
So I'm just wondering now. So your ideas have come from. So it started off as experience of working with what sounded like an innovative or an open policy unit, who encouraged you and rewarded you to ask deeper questions that you wouldn't normally do. Let's say if you're working in banking or a traditional area, or you're just trying to do some transactional policy change. It was a more profound level, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, that's exactly it. Basically, it was a very free and open environment that encouraged me to kind of ask these deeper questions. And just to be clear, I was very interested in policy before that, but I think it was in the very early stages of my career, so I didn't necessarily always have the acumen in which to pose the right questions. And it was these very early colleagues that kind of guided me a little bit and advised me and discussed with me, which was very rewarding.
And what is it that you've been working on since the first edition of the book and today with the second edition just about to come out?
Right. So basically, I'm looking a lot more at implementation and the and which countries or even states or provinces might be most viable to implement such a platform. So I went from basically in the book looking at a something more general that could be applied in or taking ideas that could be applied in multiple places to now looking more seriously at the specifics and approaching both political parties that might want to add elements of this to their own platform, and also looking at countries or regions that might be good candidates for this. Because the reality of policy is that you're dealing with politics, and which makes things a little a little bit trickier in the implementation. And so yeah, that's basically what I've been working on since then, especially more recently, and also writing some articles to discuss such topics.
And that's prompted your move to Asia then?
No, actually, the move to Asia was unrelated. Basically, I've been moving. I'll explain the connection. So basically, I actually have only been working in policy part-time since those early days. For example, I worked at a small think tank here in Thailand in association with Thammasat University here in Bangkok. But that was always something that had been since then on the side. I've been working mostly in IT in the fintech realm, financial technology, in software quality assurance. And my move to Bangkok, just like my move everywhere else, I've lived in a variety of countries. That has been prompted by those jobs, and basically I'd been moving based on the position that I'd obtained. So I only moved to Bangkok for that position. But I will say that living in different countries, I think, has actually given me kind of new perspective and new views on my politics and
Mm.
philosophy.
And within that then, what were some of the surprising things that you discovered as you were pulling the book together?
Right. So, I mean, when I was pulling the book together, basically at that time I was living already in Eastern Europe in Bulgaria, and as that relates to my some of my views. Basically, coming from Canada, I think Canada, for example, probably not only Canada, I'm sure this applies to many places. It's a little bit of it can be a little bit of a bubble in terms of uh, you see people around you living a certain way, and you see institutions functioning a certain way, and you kind of get stuck thinking that's the only way things are. But when I was putting the book together in Bulgaria, I saw kind of a different way of doing things. I would even say Bulgaria would have been an example of a place that's even a little bit more in alignment in some with regards to some of these policies. For example, the tax system is more production centric. The uh, the rate of taxation on earned income from labor, basically personal or corporate income, is only about 10%, and the burden is placed more heavily on consumption, although not really on land as I would have advocated for. But you just see the way different places operate when you move around, regardless of the reason, and it does kind of open your mind to some new ideas that might not have come to me had it not been for living abroad.
Yeah, brilliant. You do seem to be the kind of person to be open to new ideas anyway, and I guess travel matches that, doesn't it, really?
Right, exactly, yes.
Yeah. So who would you say are your ideal readers for the book?
So basically, I mean, I myself, I maybe it's an overused term, but I would have always considered myself politically homeless in a way where I didn't always feel like I was a match for any of the mainstream political parties. I always found myself both in disagreement with the policies themselves, but also some of the culture and rhetoric associated with them. I'm more interested in um, the nuts and bolts of the policies, and I think readers who are more interested in the policy realm, and they're not interested as much in getting tied up in kind of tribal camps on one side or another. I think would be great candidates for readers of the book.
Hmm. It's almost as if you're really looking at what could work, regardless of whether it's whether we're blue or red or green or whichever color you want to fasten to your mast, right?
That's right, exactly.
And what do you hope readers will get from reading the book?
So I'm hoping that it will open them to ideas and policy prescriptions that they might not have thought about before. Again, being from Canada, I'll give that as an example. There was a there's a very typical debate in Canada, for instance, between the Canadian system of a public health insurance monopoly run by the individual provinces versus the American system, which is something quite different that I think maybe more of the world is more familiar with. And there are only kind of in Canada, there are basically just two camps: people who want the Canadian system and people who look more to the U.S. And uh, these are the kinds of ideas that I think are very limiting when there are a whole wealth of policy prescriptions that are either implemented in other places or maybe have been trialed out in smaller regions or maybe that are just purely conceptual at the moment and haven't been tried out at all. So basically, I want to introduce um, ideas to people that they might not have come across yet, and that maybe even if they don't necessarily agree with, it might at least take them in sort of a new direction or introduce them to something that they might not have otherwise come across.
Hmm. Yeah, no, fantastic. That's certainly the key. Do you find it? Are you finding it? Given some of your ideas in the book, which we're going to get into slightly later, do you find it? Are you more inspired now? 10 years on, having started this process, or are you finding it tougher? Or what's your current experience?
Actually, I'm equally inspired. I'm very encouraged to see some of these ideas enter the mainstream. I mean, just the other day in the Financial Times, there was one author who had a nearly, at least it was nearly the top of the FT homepage, about advocating for a land value tax shift. And I think the book was very on trend, luckily, because also there's some communities, for example, on the site Reddit, if you're familiar with it, there's a subreddit for Georgism. At the time of writing the book, it had about 500 members. Now it's approaching 11,000. So I'm very encouraged to see that not only were some of the items in the book topical, but the word has been spreading, not necessarily from me, but a lot of my peers in the Georgist and physiocratic community who are working very hard to spread the word. And I do see these ideas advancing, so I do feel maybe even more encouraged. For the book, addressing the book specifically, I do also see the political realities of implementing such reforms as the last few years have gone on. And I don't know if every place has the appetite to implement them, but I do feel just as inspired as when I started, and I'm really encouraged to see the momentum that some of these ideas have been getting.
Brilliant. So what's next? I mean, at the risk of, we are just launching your book, so it's there's still going to be lots of work on there. Where are you taking your thinking now?
Right. So yeah, again, basically, I'd like to focus on actual implementation and the realities of that. So, for example, right now we're in a time where some countries are either on the cusp of a crisis or have already entered a crisis. And I think this is a prime opportunity to inject some of those ideas into the atmosphere and see where they land. So, for example, we have economic crises in countries as far as Ukraine, Sri Lanka, even next door in this region in Southeast Asia in Laos. So basically, my current steps are to work with some of the actors in these areas and see if the ideas can gain a little bit of traction in crisis hit areas, and maybe we can help them kind of get out of their economic slumps and their currency crises and their current account crises and fiscal crises with some of these policy ideas.
And where could people find out more about your ideas, Phil?
Right. So I have a website, newphysiocrats.org, as well as a subreddit called the New Physiocrats. So you can go to reddit.com/newphysiocrats, and on Twitter you can find us under the New Physiocrats.
Well, for now, thank you very much for this conversation. I'm looking forward to getting into the ideas with you.
Thank you. It's been great.
Thank you for listening to the Shepheard-Walwyn Podcast. To explore these ideas further, be sure to visit our website www.shepheard-walwyn.com and join our mailing list for news and special offers. Check out our authors and buy the books to learn more. And you can also find us on social media. Links are also on the website. And if you like the podcast, please head over to iTunes or Spotify to give us a review. It's surprisingly helpful in getting the ideas out there. So until next time, keep reading